Hello everybody, it's Sophia again from Independence Live. I'm not wearing my t-shirt today for reasons too long to describe now. As we have advertised, today the guest speaker is Jonathon Shafi from Radical Independence Campaign and the Scottish Left Project, but also we have an additional guest speaker today, which is Myrto Tsakatika of SYRIZA Scotland. I am going to switch now the camera to the two guests and we'll start our discussion. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so welcome Jonathon and Myrto. The purpose of this interview, similarly to all the other ones that I've done this week, is to have discussions around Greece and the debt and the crisis, because I feel that people actually don't understand what is going on, and there is a lot of confusion, a lot of distortion of information, and as we are approaching the Greek referendum, it's really good that people know what is going on. They know how this Greek problem is not a Greek problem, it's a European problem, it's an international problem, and how the support that we can provide from all these other places can give the strength that the Greek people need in order to stick with their aim, which is to resist, to submit to Troika and the lenders and the bankers. So let's start with Jonathon. Jonathon, what would you say about the relationship between the type of events that are happening around in Greece and the type of events that we have in this country, the UK, Scotland in particular? What kind of commonalities can we see? How can we show to people the relationship between what is happening next door here, things like fracking and all sorts of other stuff that people are really worried, and a lot of activism exists for all these issues. How does that relate to the things that develop in Greece this week?
Okay, well, I think the central theme which we have to contextualise the discussion with is that what we are seeing here is a battle between democracy, between social progress, between putting citizens' rights first, and austerity, the Troika, the institutions of capital. And within that, we're seeing all kinds of contradictions, economic, political, social, come to the fore. And that's why the crisis is not just a Greek crisis, although of course that's where it's most sharply being felt, but it's also a crisis of the Eurozone, it's a crisis of the neoliberal system in general, of austerity and austerity politics. And what we're seeing come to the fore is that tension between these forces. And when it comes to Scotland, or when it comes to any other European country outside of Greece, what happens in Greece, the outcome of what transpires over the next days and weeks and months, has a direct impact on every other country in Europe. In other words, what we are talking about here is a battle for the soul of Europe, and not just about the question of debt. And just on that, I think it's important to register, because if you read the financial pages, if you read a lot of the commentary that takes place in the mainstream about the question of Greece, the focus is on the debt, and there's good reason for focus to be in the debt, of course, and we want to see the debt dropped. But this is about far more than debt. This is about political control. This is about pursuing and generalising an agenda of austerity and privatisation right across Europe. This is about preventing there being an example where the radical left comes to power and is successful. This is about undermining not just the economy when it comes to the question of debt, but about political leadership. And they need to destroy SYRIZA as a result of that. And therefore it's in the interest of everyone right across Europe, the fundamental interests of everyone who's opposed to austerity and who wants to pursue a left agenda, that the situation in Greece falls on the side of the workers, falls on the side of ordinary people, and not on the side of the corporate elite, the banks and the troika.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And I was thinking maybe we can discuss with Myrto. A lot of people say, so what is the referendum asking? You know, kind of things like that, like what's the question, and what if this and what if that? And I was wondering, what is the simplest way to explain to people the stuff that Jonathan just said from the Greek point of view, from the government point of view? How is the government, like, what was that the government was trying to achieve? What was the message when that referendum was announced? I mean, to me, it seems that it is a message. It wasn't like a yes or no, like a dry thing. It was a message of a certain position to this situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the announcement of the referendum was carried out under very, very difficult circumstances for the Greek government and for the Greek people. I mean, it followed 5 months of negotiations in Brussels and in Athens and in other cities in the European Union, where we had a constant clash between two different worldviews, two different understandings of democracy, if you want, and two very different agendas, both political and economic. So what was constantly taking place was that the part of the institutions, as we now call them, was constantly trying to depoliticize, if you want, what was at stake, right? And what they were trying to do was show that these were really technical questions that were being discussed. Whereas the Greek side was constantly trying to repoliticize the debate and show that, in fact, these are really, really deep questions that we're talking about, and they have to do with how we understand equality, how we understand the economy, how we understand democracy. Of course, whereas one strategy was to close talks down and basically hold them behind closed doors, the Greek side was always trying to open it up to global public opinion. So, I mean, I guess in a way the talks themselves in a way reflect what Jonathan was talking about before, that we have two very, very different political agendas here. Now, when Prime Minister decided to leave the negotiating table, it was not because, of course, this was on a whim, or there had not been serious efforts to, try to come to an agreement with this within this context of Europe that very clearly SYRIZA wants to remain in, and this is not just rhetoric. And this goes very deep in this party's political strategy. The real question was, could these two worldviews, if you want, be reconciled within the European context? And I think this is very much at the core of the question and what we're talking about here. So when Alexis Tsipras left, he didn't do it lightly. He didn't take that decision irresponsibly in under no circumstances. But there had been a very difficult negotiation where he was handed an ultimatum to accept measures for the country that were outside of his mandate, his democratic mandate, the one he had from the Greek people, and B, they were completely against the principles and the politics and the strategy and the aims of the party. So, in that sense, the Prime Minister decided to go back to the Greek people as the democratic principles that he and the party aspired to certainly would call for, and go back to the people and just say, this is what we're up against. You need to speak up, and we need to go back to you and reflect on whether you accept these proposals that the institutions are giving us an ultimatum with or not. And this was pretty much what he did. So, I mean, you asked what the message was. I mean, I would say it was a political message, but I would also say, pretty much like what Jonathan was saying before, that it was a democratic message.
Okay. I'll sort of check something with you. Michael Cosmides, when he spoke on Sunday, he said that this was really the only thing that the government could do, because when they became government with this promise that they were going to stop austerity inside the European Union. So the way he was being forced to either submit to austerity, then he wouldn't fulfill one part of the thing that he was committed to, or if he just went, okay, we're leaving the euro, or then he would just not fulfill the other part of his promise. Do you think that and therefore he had to go back to the Greek people to sort of see how to proceed, precisely because he was threatened and pushed to that position?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree, and I think that, I mean, he was in any case left with very few options, but I think that, you know, he did indeed do the democratic thing to go back to the people, given that, you know, the strategy that he had been mandated on came to an impasse. But of course, I mean, as you know, the Greek government, and as we saw today in the Prime Minister's address, has never effectively left the negotiating table. The opponents, the political opponents in Greece and abroad, are trying to present the case that the government has a secret agenda to take the country out of the euro, and that the referendum is really about whether the country should be in or out of the euro. Clearly, the Prime Minister is saying something very different, which is that this is not about being in or out of Europe or the euro. In fact, the government is doing everything in their power to remain in the negotiating process. But it is about austerity. It's about these different approaches to politics, economics, and democracy that we were talking about before.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe we can think a little bit about the SNP response to that. I mean, you know, it's interesting to me as an observer what the different governments are doing. You know, from the very first moment I was reading all the time the live blog of the left GR, and, you know, the different things that were coming in, and was waiting to see with a lot of interest the different reactions. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I can't remember, an article appeared in the Guardian where there was something announced by Nicola Sturgeon. What would you think, Jonathan, and maybe Myrto, if you have thoughts about that? What is the relevance of that? What do you know? A lot of people are enthusiastic. You know, Nicola Sturgeon is really supporting Greece and saying the right things. What are your thoughts about that? In actual fact, I can't think of another example which is of the same type. But of course, it's a difficult one, because parties like Die Linke, they have expressed that, but they are not the majority anywhere, whereas the SNP is kind of the majority in Scotland, which is not an independent country, and so what are your thoughts about that? Well,
I mean, part of the weakness in the situation is that there are not more governments of the left and of the radical left that at this particular point in time can offer concrete political solidarity to SYRIZA. So that is a weakness, and that is something which the left, right across Europe, in particular in Northern Europe, has to grapple with. We have to become much more organised, and we have to become much more successful. But on the question in particular about the SNP, I wouldn't start with the SNP or Nicola Sturgeon. I would start much more with the movement in general. We have to trace this back somewhat to the independence referendum, and we have to locate the SNP's turn to anti-austerity politics, which they put forward in particular at the general election, as being a product of the pressure applied from this people's movement, which blossomed throughout the last referendum in Scotland over a 2-year period, where it became clear that people were interested in the constitutional question because they saw it as a route out of austerity, they saw it as a route away from that kind of Westminster consensus of privatisation and so on. And that's the result of the pressure that's been put on by the movement, that the SNP stand on an anti-austerity platform. And I think it's important to recognise that the way in which the SNP has released their position around this is crucial. So first, we note that there was no immediate reaction. In fact, it takes several days, and within those several days you see statements from a range of political parties, from a range of campaigns, demonstrations being organised, actually quite a lot of social media discussion around what is the SNP position on this. Nothing from Alex Salmond, for example, who's responsible for Europe, after all, in Westminster. Nothing from Alex Salmond, even until this point, I believe, nothing from Alex Salmond. And what the SNP have done is that they've put a position via Nicola Sturgeon, not through a press release, not through any kind of formal press conference, but through a communist-free article. Now, I think that what that tells us is that what's been going on inside the SNP is an argument about and a debate about how they should relate to this question of Greece. Because on the one hand, there'll be a tension that is similar to their approach to things like NATO, that they don't want to rock the boat, they want to be a formal part of European structures, that in many ways they want the Troika on side with their agenda. That's been their strategy for independence. Whereas the radical left has been arguing for a much bolder strategy, that we need to break with these institutions and that should be an impulse behind independence in the first place. So you've got that, but on the other hand, of course, you've got this whole movement of people. You've got this whole movement, not just on the streets, but in the ballot box, that has elected the SNP on the basis of anti-austerity politics, and therefore they have to pay attention to that as well. So I think that tension will have been expressing itself through argument inside the SNP. I think that's why the SNP has taken longer to respond. I think it's why they've released a position via Nicola Sturgeon through an article rather than in a formal manner through press releases and press conferences. And I think it underlines the importance, the continued importance of there being a critical, diverse movement of the left in Scotland that can hold the SNP to account. I think that's really the framework in which the SNP's made its decision. The lesson is that we don't sit back and wait. We have to act, we have to promote our point of view, we have to do so in a manner which is applying pressure to the SNP and at the same time is developing our own political alternative from the left.
Yes, no, that's very very interesting thoughts. Myrto, do you have anything to add to that?
I think I wouldn't know as much. Obviously, I'm familiar with Scottish politics, but not, of course, to the extent that Jonathon is. But what I would like to say, though, about the SNP is that we've had several SNP members who have actually written to us, and that was really touching, and have expressed their solidarity, and they have said that we want to raise this in our party, we feel very close to you, we identify, and we believe you're on the right, and that we would really like our party to stand up and support you. So I would really, I feel really touched by this, and we are, all of us in SYRIZA Scotland, the same. But this is not just for SNP members, but it's for ordinary Scottish people who have, in practice, showed their solidarity, both in participating in the events that we've co-organized together with Scottish left wing and other organizations, but also just emailing and talking and coming to shake our hand.
Yes.
So I just want to say thank you from here.
Okay. What can we do now? How can we and I put myself in this. We are in Scotland, the left of Scotland. What should we do now?
Well, I think because of the recent experience of a referendum in Scotland, I have to be careful here because I don't want to compare the two situations,
yes.
because I think that's not what I'm wanting to do here. However, the question of referendum is something which people in Scotland have faced. I have discovered today through social media reports and so on from people in SYRIZA that there's been reports of bosses, for example, locking workers out of the workplace and telling them not to come back on Monday if there's a no vote. This direct intimidation on behalf of employers. The corporate media has been vastly exaggerating, if not making up, the idea of there being food shortages, of petrol shortages. They're throwing every single trick in the book at the people of Greece. So that's the corporate media, it's the Troika and the institutions, it's those inside Greece who have a particular interest in retaining a position which promotes austerity and so on. And in many ways you can see a similarity between that kind of pressure, between that sort of political intimidation and what we saw on the last week or so running up to the referendum in Scotland, where we heard all these stories about big businesses pulling out, people are going to lose their jobs, the price of food is going to go up in the supermarkets. So you can't say that the two referendums are the exact same, and that's not what I'm saying. However, what you can see is that democracy always runs up against the parameters of the system. That democracy only means so much in capitalist societies and in neoliberal societies. They only perform a certain function, can only express themselves to a certain degree before the system will close in on the rights and the democratic rights of people to make a decision on the basis of evidence and of argument. And at the same time as all of these things which I've mentioned, you've also seen huge numbers of examples in the corporate media where only the yes side is given an airing. And again, you can look at some of the way the media covered the Scottish referendum on the lead up to September 18th, where you had a similar kind of examples. So what this tells us is that right now the people of Greece need political solidarity. And I think that that manifests itself in quite traditional ways: demonstrations, gatherings of people, passing statements, getting organisations to support, because every single picture of a demonstration, every single organisation that puts out a statement is ammunition that can be used by activists in Greece to say that the rest of Europe is standing with us. Not to believe the corporate media that we're standing alone, that we're isolated, but in fact there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people right across Europe who are standing directly with them, who understand the need for a no vote to take place. So what we can do is actually extremely important. The demonstration that we are helping to organise tomorrow in Glasgow, 6 o'clock at the Buchanan Street steps, that is a demonstration where if you are there, we will take photographs of that. Those photographs will be used, quite literally, as a weapon in the propaganda war that's taking place. And make no mistake, this is a war. This is now a battle that everyone is now engaged in. Greece is at the sharp end, but we all have a duty. We're all part of this battle, and therefore political solidarity is absolutely fundamental to the outcome of what happens in Greece. We should not underestimate the amount that we can do to make an impact on the situation. And in Scotland, given the history that I've talked about in terms of there being a referendum, given that people will have almost a sense of there being an instinctive understanding of what they're going through, at least to some extent, then I think that solidarity being put to Greece from Scotland should be as big, as broad, as physically possible. And that's what we need to mobilise on Thursday and on Saturday in Edinburgh.
Yeah. You told you want to say something about the demonstration on Saturday.
Yes, just to say that we are holding a Solidarity to Greece demonstration in Edinburgh, outside the offices of the European Commission. Obviously, this is, I think this is an obvious target, given that the European Commission is one of the three institutions of the Troika that we are talking about. So it's 12 o'clock on Alva Street, and there will be several organizations from Scotland that are going to be there, support and speak at this rally that we're holding. So the Greens, for example, the SSP will be there. The STUC, the trade unions, have confirmed that they are supporting. SYRIZA Scotland, obviously, which calls for this mobilization. Andalusia as well is going to take part. And we are in contact with several other organizations that have asked to come and show their support.
That's, you just reminded me something that I wanted to mention. and maybe we can say a little bit for the viewers here, if they don't know the Greek context of what is Andalusia, since you mentioned it, because I have also found some people who seem to be sort of with Andalusia. It's like a blog of people. They don't have specific names, it's just a blog, and they don't appear as persons. And I found an article which was saying that we have to vote no, and they explain we're not SYRIZA, we are not this, we have been Andalusia, but so it's interesting that this situation also brings together a unique, convergence of the left, almost moving, because Andalusia had been not part of SYRIZA for a very long time.
Well, I think we need to say here that the Greek left has several wings, if you want, right? So SYRIZA is only one of those, the largest one, of course, but there is the Communist Party of Greece, which has taken a very ambiguous position. It has chosen to take the position that we don't support no, we don't support yes, but we actually put forward our own ballot paper, which invites people to put in the ballot box so that there's a null and non-valid vote. I will not comment on this, I'm just because you asked me to explain the situation. Andalusia is a smaller component of the left. They're the extra-parliamentary left, anti-capitalist left. They join us in supporting the no vote, obviously, but we do have differences still of view with our comrades from Andalusia on the question of Europe, for instance. But this is no secret, this is not new. We certainly appreciate the fact that they have adopted the no position, and that's why we'll be standing side by side in the demonstration on Saturday.
I was thinking that maybe it would be interesting to talk a little bit about the European left and the potential. I was having a little discussion, kind of laughing there with Thoralf Dassler, who was the representative, a Die Linke member with whom I spoke yesterday. And I was saying that I was disappointed when I heard from Steve Freeman, who was in London in the demonstration in Trafalgar Square, and there were 500 people. I thought that was a small number of people. I was expecting more people, having seen the photographs in Madrid and even in Paris. So, and we were saying, he was laughing and he was saying, the South is more intuitive. People are just like ready to run out on the street, but we here we need to put in our diary up in the North. We need to know, and we can't just run out of the street spontaneously. And how can we sort of bring together these two different temperaments? The way people are. Maybe we need to, which is it's a funny way to talk about all of this. But then the European left is the thing to. The radical Europe, is the place to go, and we need to see how that is going to work practically, like the connections, the coordination, all of these things.
The development of the left in Southern Europe and in Northern Europe takes different forms, as we know. And I think largely that's partly there are historical reasons for this, but also that the present condition of the economy and of the society in Southern Europe and in Northern Europe is different. But also because we have to rebuild there being some kind of social base for the left to exist in the first place. So if you look at, for example, demonstrations in London, it's important and worthwhile pointing out that about 250,000 people marched on the 20th of June to oppose austerity. This was a broad demonstration. In fact, really it wasn't just a demonstration about austerity. I think that really was a demonstration of the radical left, people looking for real alternatives to, as I say, not just austerity but to neoliberalism in general and so on. And then you have 500 people who demonstrate, or around that number, who demonstrate in favour of solidarity with Greece. I think the point I'm trying to make is that we have to extend the social base of the left to an international context, and that has to be part and parcel of the process of the anti-austerity movement that's developing right across the UK. When it comes to Scotland, I think that we've done an important job. I'm not going to claim that we're at the stage that we need to be, but we've done an important job of ensuring that genuine internationalist politics have been at the heart of the movement for independence. It was very critical that that happened, because otherwise it could have quite easily slid into a kind of introverted nationalism. So I think that we've done that well. But what we need to think about doing is about genuinely coordinating a European movement. Now, there has been recent examples of where this has happened in the last 10 or 15 years. For example, the anti-war demonstrations that took place all on the same day were very impressive. People may remember the whole of the European left descending on the summits of the G8 or of the institutions. In addition to that, a whole series of social forums, very important European social forums that took place. I think that we have missed that. I think we need to get back to that sort of movement where you're actually developing a genuinely European-wide social movement. The last thing that I'll say about this is the question of political party, because political parties of the left can't exist in the abstract. They only make sense, they only have a reference point if they are part and if they are connected to a much larger social movement which is organised from below. And one of the questions that we have to face is that, generally speaking, in the last century, the left has understood the social base to be the industrial working class, factories, manufacturing bases, and so on and so forth. In other words, groups of workers that had real economic power. The situation has changed. The private sector is largely non-unionised. Workplaces are much smaller and more atomised, and therefore the question of politics comes to the fore. What will mobilise people now is political incentive, is the idea that your political values come into conflict with the system. And what we have to do is find a way of organising that. I think SYRIZA has managed to do this to an extent, because, not to go on, but one thing that you notice about SYRIZA is that there are lots and lots of members of SYRIZA who don't spend much time building SYRIZA. Right? They spend much more time building solidarity campaigns, building social movements and so on. I think that's the sort of thing that we are going to need. But we need both. We do need this genuine sense of there being a European movement which is based in communities, in streets, in the streets, in workplaces and so on, but which can also find political expression. That's the task. And in Scotland, I think that's the task that we are taking part in right now. We are trying to find a political expression for the democratic awakening that took place in the last couple of years, for the political awakening that took place. And that's always the challenge. So I think those are some thoughts anyway on how we recalibrate a genuinely European-wide challenge. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have that, we're not going to defeat austerity. And people, I think, need to understand that.
I sort of vaguely remember in this other event that was organised in Edinburgh with Podemos and the discussion, then Stelios Papazou was there, and there was at some point somebody said something, I can't remember who, which I really liked, that I think it was about the Podemos, that they just meet. Look, they were just the different groups of the Podemos, the different groups of the left. They would just meet for no reason, like not because there was a demonstration or something, but they would kind of regularly meet to chat.
Yes,
that was it.
That was the comrade from the Spanish United Left,
yes,
who mentioned the forum of Latin American countries and leaders and movements that actually meet on a regular basis, and that has generated so much, ideas and networks and modes of cooperation.
Which we might have to think of that as a strategy, to not wait for things that need to be done. The different campaigns, we do those things, but that is more proactive. It's like, we got our forum, we got our. It felt to me empowering. It felt like, we're gonna have our space, because this is like a space of people. We have created our space. It's ours, and we do what we want. We don't come together to solve a problem that somebody else only, somebody else presents to us. We just have our own world. Which I thought was a brilliant idea, and I think we should try to find ways to make real that somehow.
Well, I think Jonathon mentioned the European Social Forum and what was going on basically from round about the time of Seattle in 1999 until 2006. So that was kind of the high tide of the European-wide movement. And I think that's left a very important legacy, but I also think, and in fact even today we're still going through those channels, we're still going through those networks that were created at that time. But I think that there was a weakness in this respect, which was that didn't crystallize into a political alternative at European level. On the other hand, and that said, you did have the development of the Party of the European Left after 2006, of which SYRIZA is a founding member, Synaspismos, the predecessor of SYRIZA, together with the Italian Communist Foundation, the Spanish Communist Party, the French Communist Party, and Die Linke, or the predecessor of Die Linke. In fact, one of our comrades from SYRIZA Scotland, Stelios Papazou, was one of the actual people who participated in the very first cluster that put that together. And that has grown to encompass more than 40 parties of the radical left across Eastern and Western Europe. So that's not a small development, because as the years have gone by since 2006, the part of the European left is developing a certain level of political maturity, and from conference to conference, it's going from politics of the lowest common denominator, as you might expect from such a diverse conglomerate of parties of the radical left family, towards more concrete achievements and developing a common agenda. And what I can see is that what is happening at the moment with SYRIZA is only strengthening that development. But I also agree very much so. Coming from the South European tradition and with what Jonathon said for the national level, I think it also works it's also valid for the European level. That you need both the movement and the politics. You need both the party and the movement, and it's a dialectic relationship that neither can function without the other. So in that sense, if now there is kind of a party system developing at European level on the left, we need to go back and not neglect the question of the movement and try to develop all these different alternatives, but also the forum that allows movements and political groups to discuss and to develop their ideas, because we don't know everything. We are at the phase of developing something new here in the European continent, right? Where after 1989, where the Soviet model collapsed, right, and we're all very aware of the problems and the shortcomings and the difficulties that had. We can't say that we have an answer. We can't say that we have discovered something new. SYRIZA has worked very hard to develop this, and especially now that it's in the government, hopefully it will stay much longer in government so it can start to implement its ideas. We don't have an answer. We're developing one. We're exploring one. We have the same values. We have the same imperatives. We put people first. We put people before profit. This is where we have to go. What we're doing now is exploring new ways of getting there.
I mean, I think I agree with all of that. I think that one of the questions that we face is how to rebuild some form of social solidarity, because often this was found in the trade unions, and I'm not deriding the trade unions, but the trade unions now in Britain, for example, and Scotland, are much different than they were in the 1970s. We have to recognise the change that's taken place there, and we have to relate to it. But I also wanted to say that often I think we talk about the various crises of the left and the crisis that SYRIZA faces and so on. But something also is going on, which is that there is actually a crisis of capitalism that we're dealing with here. There is a crisis in the ruling class. There is a crisis at the top of society. I think that we have to say that this isn't just because you have some people who are greedy and they want to see a system that suits them. This is actually this crisis that we're seeing is hardwired into the operation of the capitalist system. And actually more people are beginning to understand that process. And I think that that opens up a huge space ideologically for people on the left to actually start to expose the nature of the system, how it works, how it leads to crisis, who it benefits and why. And this is going to be fundamental. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that the most successful movements are also educational movements. It kind of relates to what you were talking about earlier, where people sort of meet up and they have political discussion. We actually need more of that, because neoliberalism strategically and deliberately undermines that at every level. I mean, they don't want there to be a political discussion. One of the reasons, just go back to the Scottish referendum briefly, one of the reasons that the No campaign didn't engage with debate and so on and so forth, they didn't want the debate in the first place. They didn't actually want people to be exposed to a whole range of political ideas which under normal circumstances they wouldn't have been exposed to. Equally, when the Tories shut down libraries, they shut down community centres and so on, they're also shutting down the possibility of there being a democratic culture within a community. So the whole agenda of neoliberalism is to undermine democracy. The whole agenda of that system is to dislocate people from one another, whether it's a workplace or a union or a community. It's to individualise people right across society. And that fundamentally has to be challenged, and that can only be challenged by, I think, a movement from below, rather than from preaching from above. So the left has to break with sloganeering, with propaganda, and actually start thinking about how we generate a movement. I think that's one of the lessons of SYRIZA, and certainly of Podemos.
Okay, thank you. Now it seems that we have some questions from people watching us, and just to explain here that usually we have a support system, so we have another support person here, Craig, who is, because of the particular setup that we have today, I couldn't have both things at once, and Craig has been following the chat, and he's got the questions. So what kind of...
So a question from someone we all know, which is Ben Ray, and Ben asks, these questions are mostly for Myrto, to be perfectly honest. So he's just asking, does the experience of the Eurozone make you think an independent Scotland should have its own currency and central bank? It's an easy question from Ben.
That's a grenade.
I think he knows that.
Right. Well, I think, we're looking at two very different things here. Comparing, Greece to Scotland. Clearly, I think actually Varoufakis has written an article about this question. To be perfectly honest, and this is my own view. It doesn't represent, necessarily the view of SYRIZA, and of course there are different views about the euro within SYRIZA, as everyone knows. I do think that there is a question about, how the eurozone is made up. The eurozone architecture, its faults, its problems. became very clear over the last period. So not only is it undemocratic, in the sense that the European Central Bank has absolutely no democratic accountability. It's the most independent bank in the world, apart from being subject to a specific ideology, which makes part of the central bankers that pretty much have a very very fixed and narrow understanding of politics and stability, for example. So it's not just that the ECB is completely undemocratic, and this is a scandal in terms of what we consider democratic in Europe. It's also that there's a mismatch between the question of how fiscal policy is decentralized. So each of the countries has, subject to certain rules of coordination, its own decisions to make about how to tax and spend. But at the same time, monetary policy is exercised by the European Central Bank at the European level. I mean, clearly we've seen the failure of the system for a number of reasons, and this is a very long discussion. So, I mean, I guess my answer to Ben would be, I would think twice if I were a country that were, say, a member of the European Union, but aiming to join the Eurozone at the moment, because I think that unless a number of structural problems, constitutional problems are addressed, the Eurozone is exacerbating inequality, it's exacerbating distributional issues within the European Union, across countries and within countries. So I would be very, very cautious about wishing this on anyone at the moment. Let me put it that way. This is not to say that in principle, in my own personal view, a common currency could not be an umbrella that would be able to support everyone in principle, and actually be a strength for Europe in the future vis-a-vis its international role. Or also, if it was done together with some kind of fiscal federalism, transfers from richer to poorer countries. I mean, this is not just a matter of permanent transfers from north to south, because in a fiscal union, in principle, you can be poor one day and rich the next, and maybe you're up next. So. What I'm saying is that I don't think that the common currency is in principle a problem. I think it's very problematic the way it's set up, and I think that any country that wants to join at the moment, that is a member of the European Union or aspires to become a member of the European Union, I would think twice.
Okay.
But also, I think the thing about this is that we have to remember why Greece is in this position. They're in this position because they have a government of the radical left. You are not allowed to have a radical left government in the Eurozone. You are not allowed to do it, right? That is what they're saying. You just cannot do it. I mean, that's my view. I think Scotland should have its own independent currency. I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward on that question. But I mean, I think we have to say now that they want to create an example. They want to destroy SYRIZA. It's not just about the debt. They want to destroy SYRIZA. They want to destroy Tsipras. They want to destroy the whole movement in Greece. They want it dead. And they want it dead because they cannot afford for this example to be spread anywhere else in the Eurozone. And therefore, the question of democracy is fundamental.
Thank you.
There's another question which is quite an interesting question from Dave Reed. Dave asks, how important were the talks between Alexis Tsipras and Putin as far as kind of like geopolitics goes, or is Tsipras just playing a different hand, so to speak?
Right. I think there was quite a lot of misunderstanding on this issue of Russia. So when Alexis Tsipras and ministers of the government, which there's been a lot of comings and goings between Greece and Russia ever since we have the new government. So when Tsipras went to Russia, it was not to beg. It was not to ask for substitute money so that we can cover our liquidity problems or anything like that. It was because SYRIZA, first of all, has what we call a multilateralist foreign policy, which means that, okay, we are primarily, our orientation of our country is primarily European, but at the same time, we want to develop, peaceful and productive cooperation with Russia, with China, with BRICS, with the United States, with pretty much everyone. So it's not a matter for necessarily strategic discussion of the Tsipras is trying to play Russia against Europe and so on. So it is in the context of a broader strategy. That said, of course, there is a signal there. There is a signal there. The signal is that Greece has other options, which I think is fair enough because of the country's geostrategic position. At the same time, I think it's very productive what's been happening at the moment, which is that there are discussions about energy cooperation that have actually been very fruitful. And also something that is a bit less known, which is that one of the things that basically helps the Greek economy at the moment is the agricultural exports, and given that there was the Russian embargo and sanctions that were imposed from the European Union to Russia, Russia had countered that with banning imports, and that really was a problem for the northern Greek economy in particular, which depends a lot on agricultural exports to Russia. So one of the things that happened when Tsipras went to Putin was that this was in a way settled, and so now Greece, Cyprus, and Hungary, I believe, have the opportunity to export agricultural products to Russia. So, because think about it, okay, we have the question of sanctions in the north which prohibit agricultural products and their export. There's the question of immigration and how we handle it from the south, coming from the south. There's the problem of liquidity that there is at the moment. So how do they expect us to develop? Where do they expect us to start to breathe economically? So I think it's in a way it's unfair to ask Greece, not to have relations with Russia and not to have commercial relations. So in brief, I would say yes. It is a signal, but at the same time, it is a very pragmatic question of developing economic relations with Russia, a country with which traditionally Greece had economic relations.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have something to add to this?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I think that,
Okay. Is there anything else there?
Just the one final one, then
Okay.
I probably just to wrap it up. It's just it's quite an interesting one personally because I didn't know this, but Dave's asking again about the stance of the Social Democrats of Germany, who are kind of like Tories or whatever you want to call them, but they were for a referendum when Papandreou was the Greek Prime Minister, but now they're against one. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if this is true, and I don't know this.
Can you say it again? Sorry.
I'll let you see it. It says obviously that the Social Democrats were for.
What do you think about the stance? They were for referendum. Okay, no, not Papadopoulos, no, Papandreou. Okay. So the idea is why the German Social Democrats were in favor of the Papandreou referendum and not the Greek one. Sorry, but I'm not familiar. I have my suspicions, but which are the obvious ones, that they belong to the same political family. But I'm afraid I don't know very much about it.
Potentially come down to the fundamental point. I think that most of us are agreed on that. Just like Angela Merkel said today, that it's not about the money. It's just purely about crushing this, and at all costs, regardless. So.
She did say it's not about the money, but it's about following the rules, which
There's your told.
yeah. I think that says everything. There is one thing I'd like to say, which is that as I think you mentioned also in the beginning, Sophia, there's been quite a lot of misinformation and a virtual war in the media. So I would urge everyone to keep calm and to just try to be very, very careful about how they read papers like the Financial Times, or the Wall Street Journal, for example, today, because there was today in particular, it was a particularly heavy day in this respect. From this morning, we had all these respectable, otherwise respectable newspapers spreading what was clearly, spin and misinformation about the intentions of the SYRIZA government. So we had information going around that Tsipras was about to come out and cancel the referendum because of banking collapse. We had information that last night the Greek government capitulated and is actually begging the creditors and the institutions to reverse and to actually accept what was going on and what they had proposed. And none of this, of course, as it turned out over the course of the day, was true. So just to say, be very careful what you read. Trust not your enemies, but trust your friends.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe if there is nothing else to add,
Come to the demonstrations.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Let's remind people.
tomorrow 6 o'clock, Buchanan Street Steps in Glasgow. We want as many people there as possible, and we'll go to the steps, we'll take some photos, we'll have some action taking place in the city centre of Glasgow, and then Saturday in Edinburgh, the European Commission, 12 o'clock, and if there's any more, just will come later. But yeah.
Just let you know. Okay, so I'm just going to say goodbye, people. Okay. Thanks everybody for watching tonight as well, and yes, we will have more of these discussions. Okay, good night.